Hey guys, I've been off for 2 or 3 weeks. I've had a bit of a vacation getting away from the grind, but I am glad to be back. Happy to be here as usual. And I'm ready for today's talk. You know, I don't think much of relationship advice. It's too easy to give, and whoever is sharing their wisdom with you doesn't have to live with the consequences of taking their advice. It's also mostly bullshit when you count the garbage they've been feeding women about men for the past 50 years. So it is with some irony that I sit down to write out a talk that amounts to relationship advice. I try not to think about it like that and instead prefer to see myself as just talking about this stuff, hoping that at least some men will find something useful in it. I've come to some conclusions after more than a few years spent working with men and even more time trying to sort out my own shit in life. One thing is that most of men's problems, damn near all of them I'd say, go back to their relationships with women. At the very least, that is where their problems get played out and where their problems sometimes have puppies. I see men's problems with regularity to this day trace back directly to one fact that affects men universally, a fundamental challenge facing every man who gets in a relationship with a woman. Every man out there who wants a permanent long-term commitment, cohabitation, marriage, or any variation thereof will face this choice with near absolute certainty. And that is when it comes to your woman, you are either going to train her into becoming an acceptable partner, or you're going to get trained, most likely into being something along the lines of wage slave and emotional pincushion. I suppose this is as good a time as any to address those of you who are listening to this, having grand mal virtue fits listening to me talk about training a woman to be a decent partner. All I can say is grow up. People, all people, train each other in how we will be treated. Every couple goes through a process of establishing rules, setting limits, occasionally crossing boundaries, and dealing with the fallout, all in a process that determines the rules of the relationship and the standards by which we will be treated. You train, you get trained. You even train people how to train you. That is it. You can put a period at the end of the sentence and call it a day, though there are a couple more little facts that you will want to consider as you think about the implications of that choice. First, you're dealing with a creature, especially if she is attractive, who has lived a good part of her life with men standing in line for the opportunity to sacrifice anything for her that she wants. You are also dealing with a creature who lives in a culture that sees this as the natural order of things, that this is essentially the male role in life, and that society has set that masochistic willingness to sacrifice as a standard that all men should emulate. So, to overcome this problem, you not only have to train her, you must do it in a society that will turn on you in an instant for doing it. Oh, and one more little tidbit. When it comes to training, getting trained, all that, she is likely a damn sight better at it than her man is. Where it concerns men, she is the one who has been raised to be the trainer, to get her way. He's been raised to give it to her. She knows his buttons and his weaknesses often better than him. When it comes to using shame and sex as a method of control, she's a maestro with a baton. And of course, he is adept at taking instructions. And if he doesn't take instructions well, she can take her man through maddening, endless rounds of emotional whack-a-mole without missing a stroke. She can take him to the edge of insanity and back, and if he loses it, she'll shame him for that too. And the world will still shun him if he does anything about any of this except comply with his mouth shut, which is what almost all men do because they cannot possibly imagine doing anything else. And yes, I know there are lots of men wearing wedding rings that would quickly stand up and say that their marriage is nothing like that. And some of them would no doubt be telling the truth. But I also know that there's a whole lot of beta cucks out there wearing gold bands who will by God stand up and tell you exactly what he thinks his wife wants to hear. Like I said, train or get trained. And should any man decide to take on the task of training his woman to be a qualified partner and asset in his life, he will need to keep a sharp focus on some very harsh realities about what he has to overcome. A good place to start is the so-called social contract between men and women, the unwritten, largely unspoken rules of what is expected of men and women respectively in relationships. That contract, as it stands today, cannot produce a healthy relationship. That may have been different in the past and more functional, though I argue that there's a lot of room for interpretation about that. Rather than digress, though, I will stay focused on the social contract as it is actually practiced by men and women in today's world. And that contract, the current norm for men and women, is an unfair, highly abusive arrangement exploiting male sacrifice on a level that no reasonable person could call just or even sensible. It requires men to gag themselves and submit to an endless barrage of double standards on everything from minor decisions around the house all the way to who gets to hit. The current social contract demands that men take on the role of chief enabler for immature, entitled women with no sense of reciprocity or fairness, absent even fundamental responsibility for their own behavior. To even complain about this is a violation of the contract. And so it almost goes without saying that the contract, its provisions of enforced chivalry and mindless deference, has to go. I've known more men than I can remember who report that their relationship came at the expense of their friendships, hobbies, and pretty much anything else that might interfere with her wants and needs. Every loss was another silent sacrifice on the altar of gynolatry, another hard lesson in their training to be good men. It is a dark picture, a beast that will consume the lives of most men. Of course, the good news is that we have red pill philosophy. It's the only thing that strikes me as having reasonable ameliorative potential for men with women. And it is red pill men and red pill men only who can see the social contract, fully understand the provisions, and come to the rational conclusion that it is a totally fucked up arrangement that only a fool would avail himself to. These are the men who have a fighting chance to take an above-average example of modern femininity in a woman and whip her into shape as a worthwhile partner. Oh, and for the idiots who take whip her into shape as a veiled reference to violence, please go to a junkyard and shut yourself in a rusty old refrigerator. Thank you. What I am talking about here is being in part a disciplinarian. In the paternal sense, you train her like a loving father, dispensing consequences for her inappropriate behaviors. You never yield to her petulant demands. You double her shit tests and return them to her. You reject her emotional blackmail. One of the most common types of emotional blackmail is the you don't care ploy, which many women use when you give them any resistance to getting their way. It's, if you loved me, you would fill in the blank. Or you won't take me where I want to go because you don't care about me. Or the ever popular, you only care about yourself. Hearing something like this automatically sets beta males into emergency mode, where they desperately rattle off a dozen examples of things they did to prove they care. They can even get heated about it. The approach I am suggesting is quite different. Emotional blackmail is an absolute form of emotional abuse, And when your woman tells you that you don't care enough about her to give her what she wants, you can simply look her in the eye and say, "Well, I don't care enough about you to put up with this." Then go find something else to do while she explodes. The point here is that if you want to train a woman, you have to be consistent in reacting to bullshit for what it is. Wickedly, Terminator-style consistent. Of course, you can sit her down after her jets have cooled and have a nice fatherly talk about how you want to help her get the most cooperation from you when she wants something. You can gently remind her that attempts to blackmail and coerce will automatically backfire on her and blow up in her face, even if what she wants is reasonable, even if you would otherwise be cheerfully inclined to accommodate her. And you can explain to her that being in a grown-up relationship means that both people will hear the word no on occasion, and that grown-ups, real grown-ups, take the occasional no with some grace and move on. They don't start punishing people like a petty tyrant. When she keeps digging her heels in and doubles down on her attempt to bully you, you can even inform her that she's made quite a mess and that you won't cooperate with her about anything till she takes the initiative to do a convincing job of cleaning it up. As long as you're not stupid enough to try to bluff her by making statements you won't back up, it's your most reasonable shot at red-pilling the problem, or at least getting the problem to pack her shit and leave. By the way, the same approach applies to every strategy in the modern social contract playbook. Manipulating you with sex, or by withholding sex. Challenging or shaming your manhood, or by demanding that you quit seeing friends or taking time for your interests. All the underhanded, psychologically warped things she does to make everything in both your lives about her. Now, I'm sure that some of you are now saying that there's no way women will ever be held to those kinds of standards. They'll leave. And you are generally right. Most women will leave. As a matter of fact, if you tried this approach and told me it worked with the first woman you tried it on, I'd have a hard time believing you. You are bound to run off several, hell, many, before you manage to snag one that can tolerate the training. Those women, in my experience, are out there. They are more common than unicorns, but hardly falling out of trees. You just have to decide if it is worth the trouble for you to make the effort. And of course, you still have to be mindful of more pressing matters like never putting yourself at the mercy of the state for the sake of a relationship. I know at this point that some of you, likely men going your own way, will simply write all this off. Too much work, too much risk, way too little reward. I wouldn't dismiss what you're saying at all. This is essentially taking on the task of turning a child into a grown woman, in a world that isn't wired for grown women near as much as it is for women who act like children. It is a massive amount of very aggravating work with casino-style odds for success. But here's the deal. Most men, most of you listening to what I'm saying, even most of my brethren in the MGTOW community, are going to pair bond with women sooner or later. I won't say that that is our fate, but it is our strong inclination. We are wired as a species to do this. So as long as most men are going to end up, temporarily or otherwise, dealing with that woman child, you're a lot better off going into it with something other than a social contract that leaves you in a ditch. And that is it for another talk. Feel free to leave your comments, guys. I appreciate subs, likes, and shares on the videos, and especially appreciate those who visit my Patreon to kick something in the tip jar. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.